Okay, the last thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to be talking about factoring with the foolproof method. It means that even fools can do this method. Okay? Now, this that we're going to be factoring, we're going to be factoring problems that look like this. Okay? We're going to be factoring our trinomials. Now, when I'm dealing with this problem, we are going to be referring to the standard form, which the standard form for a trinomial is ax squared plus bx plus c. So when you guys hear me refer to a, I'm talking about the number that is in front of x squared. If I'm referring to b, I'm talking about the number that's in front of your x. If I'm talking about c, I'm talking about that constant term at the very end of it. Okay? You guys are all required to factor this way. Some of you guys, as you work through it, will be like, oh, I know how to factor in my head. I don't care. You will factor. Okay? There is steps to be shown on every single one of these when you factor. Okay? Factoring problems that are like the x squared minus 3x minus 10, those are pretty easy to factor in your head. But the reason that I want you to understand this foolproof method is you guys will also be asked to factor things like 2x squared minus 5x plus 3. And those are much more difficult to do in your head, but if we all understand how to do this foolproof method, they won't be an issue. So, if you can factor in your head, great. You have to show your work. If you do not show your work, you will not receive credit for doing these. You won't get any points for your quiz either. So we need to make sure that we understand this foolproof method. Okay. Seems like a lot of steps. Basically what we're going to be doing is something called factoring by grouping. Okay, and we'll practice this later on in the year. But it's going to be something that will make it easy to factor, and it'll make it a lot less easier than getting stuff caught up in your head and making a simple mistake. The way that you do your foolproof method is you will start out by finding the product of A and C. So when I say find the product of A and C, I'm going to take this number in front of my x squared and this number with my C, and I'm going to multiply them. Okay, so I'm going to multiply those two together, and then I'm going to find all the factors for that number. Okay? If there is a plus sign here, I'm going to be looking for factors that add to equal my B term. If there's a minus sign here, I'm going to be looking for factors that will subtract to give me my B term. Okay? When I do that, I'm going to rewrite the trinomial, replacing the middle term. So I'm going to replace that bx. It won't be there anymore. And I'm going to use the two factors that I discovered worked for this step up here. After I do that, I'm going to determine what signs need to be new, what signs, positive or negative, need to be used for the two new terms so that they will equal b. Then I'm going to use that greatest common factoring that we did in the last video so that you can see how to factor out the greatest common factor for the first two terms, factor out the greatest common factor for the last two terms. Your answer will be right there in front of you at that point. Okay? One of the factors will be made with the expression that is in both the parentheses, and it will match. And the other is going to be made up of the leftovers. Okay? Now, all of that probably sounds super confusing. But we're going to work through a couple of these examples together, and I'm going to have you guys try one on your own as well. Okay? So, I've made this video. I've tried to make them shorter so that you guys can find the stuff that you guys need. I've tried to give specific examples of them as well. Okay? So, foolproof method option 1. I've got a plus minus here. Okay? This is how it is going to work if you have a positive and a negative. Okay? So the first thing we need to do is we need to find the product of A and C. Find the product of A and C. So my C, in this case, is a 30. I do not care that it's negative. Do not pay attention to the fact that it's negative. We are using a 30. My A, in this case, is the number in front of my x squared, which that is a 1x squared. So I'm going to take 1 times 30. 1 times 30 gives me 30. So my factors are 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. Those are all the factor pairs of 30. Okay? So, as I'm filling in here, okay, we found the product of A and C. I am going to find the factors of 30, which I just did, that will, this sign right here tells me what I need my factors to do. I need my factors of 30 to subtract, to equal, and remember I want them to subtract to equal B, the number that is in front of x. So what number is in front of x? Well, that would be a 1. So I need to find the factors of 30 that will subtract to equal 1. We do not pay attention to any negatives. So, which of these factor pairs up here would subtract to give me 1? Well, 30 minus 1 gives me 29. Not that one. 15 minus 2 would give me 13. Not that one. 10 minus 3 would give me 7. Not that one. 6 minus 5 gives me 1. So 6 and 5 are my factor pairs. So I'm going to rewrite the trinomial at this point, but I am going to replace my b term with a 5x and a 6x. So I'm going to rewrite. I'm going to have x squared, and I still have a negative 30. Nothing happened with those. But now in the middle, instead of an x, I'm going to have a 5x and a 6x. Okay? The next thing I need to determine is I need to determine what signs need to be in front. Now that I'm doing that, now I pay attention to the fact that that's a positive 1. Okay? So I need to have a blank 6 and a blank 5 so that they combine to equal a positive. I need them to equal a positive 1. Okay? So what do I need to have so that they equal a positive 1? Well, if I try a positive 5 and a negative 6, positive 5 and negative 6, if I combine those together, that gives me a negative x, right? So it's not that case there. That's not the case I need. Okay? I'm going to try again. What if I did a positive 5, or sorry, just try that one. That was bad. What if I did a negative 5x and a positive 6? Okay, well if I combine those together, that gives me a positive x, which is what I started with. So that's what I need to use. Okay, so I determined that my signs here, I needed to have a positive 6 and a negative 5. Okay? Now, I'm ready to factor out the greatest common factor of the first two terms. Okay, so first two terms. What do those two terms have in common? Well, they both have an x. So I'm going to factor out an x, and I'm left with x minus 5. Then I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor of the last two terms. I've got a positive 6x minus 30. What do both of those have in common? We can say a 2. They also have a 3 in common with them. So that would mean that they both have a 6 in common. So since this is a positive 6, I can pull out a positive 6. And when I do that, I'm left with an x minus 5. Now this is the part that on the last page probably looked confusing. Notice how both of them have an x minus 5? That means one of my factors is x minus 5. And then the other factor is the leftover. So what's left over? Well, there's an x, and there's a positive 6. So my other factor is an x plus 6. Okay? I got x minus 5 times x plus 6. Okay? Another question that kids will ask me is they will say, okay, well, how did you know to put the 5 in front of the 6? What turns out is that it doesn't even matter. Okay? Say I did it the other way. Say I had an x squared plus 6x minus 5x minus 30. Okay? If I factored this out, I could pull an x out. Leaves me with an x plus 6. Now, this point here, see how both of those are negative? And we'll talk about this here in a second. But if that is a negative, we have to factor out a negative. What do 5 and 30 have in common? Well, 5 and 30 would have a 5 in common. And I would be left with an x. I pulled out a negative, so that's got to be a positive. So now, the only difference is now I have x plus 6 on the inside. And an x minus 5 is my leftover. But we're still going to get the exact same answer. So the order on that does not actually matter. Okay? So if you guys are going through this, okay, that right there was an example of how to do it if there's a plus sign and then a minus sign. The next page, we're going to do one where they are both minus signs. Okay? So I'm going to have an x squared minus something. Okay? Also something new. We have a number in front of our x squared. Okay? That's the best part about the foolproof method is nothing changes even if there is a number in front of that. Okay? So I'm going to start out with, the first thing I do is I find the product of A and C. So A and C, 3 times 6 gives me 18. Okay? So I need to find the factors of 18 that will subtract to equal 7. We do not pay attention to negatives. Factors of 18 that will subtract to equal 7. Okay, so what are my factors of 18? I've got 1 and 18. That's 17. No. 2 and 9. Oh, that's 7. So 2 and 9 are the factors that I want to use. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite the trinomial, but I'm going to replace the middle term with a 2x and a 9x. Okay? So, I'm going to have 3x squared minus 6. Those you just write down. But now I'm also going to have a 2x and a 9x. Okay? I need a blank 9 and a blank 2 so that they combine to equal a negative 7. So what do my signs need to be? Positive 9, negative 2? No. Negative 9, positive 2. Yes, that would give me a negative 7. So I'm going to have a negative 9 and a positive 2. Okay? Again, we're going to factor something out of the first two terms. So what do those have in common? Just an x. They've got a 3 and a 2. Those aren't anything in common, so the only thing I can pull out is an x. Okay, and when I do that, I'm left with a 3x, and I'm left with just a 2. So I've got a 3x plus 2. Factor something out of the second 2, and I kind of mentioned this, but if this is a negative, if there's a negative there, you have to factor out a negative. Okay, and then what do 9 and 6 have in common? Well, 9 and 6 would both have a 3 in common. So I'm pulling out a negative 3. If I pull out a negative 3 from a negative 9x, I'm left with a positive 3x. If I pull out a negative 3 from a negative 6, I'm left with a positive 2. Okay? These two on the inside have to match. They do. That means we did it right. So I've got 3x plus 2. And then what's left over? X minus 3. So x minus 3 is my other factor. Okay? Now, this is an example where you have a minus and a minus. Okay? If you guys notice, the fact that this is negative, we do the same thing. We need those factors to subtract. We need those factors to subtract. Okay, what I'm going to ask you to do at the end of this video is I'm going to ask you guys to now try this one on your own. Okay, so go ahead and give this one a shot on your own. Pause the video, see if you guys can get it. Okay, so hopefully you guys have tried this one on your own now. Okay, so we're going to go through x squared minus 2x minus 3. Remember, we start out a times c. What is my a? Well, it's a 1 in this case, so 1 times 3. I need factors of 3 that will subtract. Factors of 3 that subtract to give me a 2. Factors of 3 that subtract to give me a 2. Well, 3 minus 1 gives me 2. Those are the only factors. Thank goodness it works. So I've got an x squared, I've got a 3x, and I've got a 1x minus 3. Okay? So now, I need to figure out my signs here. And I didn't say this, but I wondered if you guys picked up. If this is a minus, one of these has to be a positive, one has to be a negative. Okay? And you guys have to figure out. But we need those to combine to give us a negative 2. So if you want it to be a negative 2, you need a negative 3x and a positive 1. What can I factor out of the first two terms? Well, you can pull an x out. I'm left with an x minus 3. What can I factor out of the second two terms? Mr. Shearer, I can't factor anything out of this. That is correct. There's nothing in common, but there is always one number that you can factor things out of. And that one number is the number 1. We can pull a positive 1 out of that. And if I factor out a positive 1, nothing else changes. It's just x minus 3. Okay? So I've got an x minus 3. Those match. That's good. That's one of my factors. My other factor is what's left over, x plus 4. Okay? So anytime you guys are doing one of these problems and you guys are confused, go back to this video if there is a negative in front of the constant term. That's what this video is for, teaching you how to factor these if there's a negative in front of that constant.